Week 2 review, let's go. All right, so we talked about consumer behavior and elasticity on the second week. I'm going to go over just a couple of the major topics, and then we're going to jump into the parts of the assignments and the quizzes. All right, so when we had the consumer behavior and elasticity, we start out with our backbone of the problem, the price elasticity of demand equation. This is something that tells us how responsive the quantity demand of consumers is to a price change, right? So the percentage change in quantity demand over the percentage change in price. Lots of people like to confuse quantity demand and quantity supply, or sometimes they might confuse quantity demand and demand. What we're talking about is how much, the amount that people purchase under different price amounts, right? So this looks something more like this, where we're moving along the same line. So on this one, or excuse me, the one on the left, notice that we have a small price change and a relatively large change in quantity, right? If we move from here to here. If we have something like this, it's a relatively flat slope. We call this elastic. This is everything from 1 to infinity, like not 1 because it's unit elastic, but like just right next to 1 all the way up to infinity. That's called elastic. That means that the change in consumer behavior is greater than the change in price. So percentage change in quantity demand is bigger than the percentage change in price. All right, on the other side, we have inelastic. This is something in between 0 and 1. So 0 is perfectly inelastic. You are not making any changes in the quantity that you purchase, regardless of what the price is. $10, $1 million, whatever. Most things tend to be more inelastic, right? So we see that we have a price change and then quantity demand doesn't change all this much. That's the idea of like gasoline, right? Gas prices can go up 20%. You're not driving 20% less. You're driving maybe like 5% less. So the percentage change in quantity demand is smaller than the percentage change in price. So that's one thing that we have to remember when we're talking about the price elasticity of demand. And there's how we calculate it. Here's some examples. We talked about how it's a unit free measure and then general ideas, right? So I'd know about the extremes and kind of what this means in the middle. We talked about how the elasticity can be determined by the closeness of substitutes. Are there a lot of things that you can use instead of this? Then you're probably elastic to it. You have other options. If it is the only thing that works, like for example, you have a machine and there's like one specialized piece and nothing else works for the specialized piece, well, then you're relatively inelastic, right? Same with like luxury goods. You're relatively elastic to luxury goods. You're relatively inelastic to things that are necessities. On the other hand, we have the proportion of income spent on the good. If it's something that's very pricey, right? Like something that's expensive, it accounts for a large amount of your income, like you're going to be very price sensitive to that. You're going to be more elastic. A 10% jump in the price of a car, that's really going to affect your buying patterns of cars relative to like a candy bar at the checkout. If a candy bar at the checkout is 10% more expensive, you don't really care. It's a much smaller part of your income. Then we also have to think about the time lapse since the price change. How long have you had to adjust to this new price? So then we talked about elasticity around the curve. Then we had the total revenue and elasticity. I love asking questions about this one. Notice that we refer back to the total revenue test and the arrangements in between if something is increasing total revenue or decreasing total revenue relative to if it's elastic or inelastic relative to a price increase or price decrease. I would go back, like I'm not going to cover it here because I think you honestly need to go back to the week 2 video if you're wanting to review it and sit down and really look at that section. I do tend to ask a lot of questions from it. Remember, that's the idea that if prices go down and total revenue goes up, we're elastic, right? If prices go up and total revenue goes down, we're elastic. We are very sensitive to those price changes. If price goes up and total revenue goes up, well, we're inelastic. We're not changing the quantity to demand by as much as the price change. If price goes down and total revenue goes down, same thing, right? People are relatively inelastic and we're not getting way more people into the store for this price change because the same amount of people are purchasing it. So that's something to remember and just think about that one. Then we talked about income elasticity. Remember, income elasticity is just the same thing on the percentage change in your quantity demand, but instead of being relative to a price change, this is relative to a percentage change in your income. So do you make a lot more money? Do you make a lot less money? The cross price elasticity is how things relate to each other, right? This is how we figure out if something's a substitute or a complement. So it's the percentage change in quantity demand of good A relative to the percentage change in price of good B. So if the price goes up on good A and you buy more of good, or excuse me, if the price goes up, did I have A, B? If the price goes up on good B and you buy more of good A, that means that they're probably substitutes, right? You're now switching to that other thing. If the price goes up for good B and you buy less of good A, that means that they're probably complements, that you're starting to not purchase the thing that you would have purchased in a bundle, right? So then we have the elasticity of supply, same thing as the price elasticity of demand, except it's the price elasticity of supply. Notice that we're looking at the percentage change in quantity supplied relative to this percentage change in price. It's how much do producers change the amount they're bringing to the market, the percentage change in the amount that they are supplying, right? Their quantity supplied relative to a percentage change in price. All right, so after that, we started talking about factors that influence elasticity of supply. Remember that was one of the questions from your homework, so I wouldn't expect to see it again, but you should probably know it. It's the idea that there might be resource substitutions or there might be time frames in your supply decisions. If it's right now the price changes, well, I can't really change how much I'm making today, but I can change how much I'm making in a year or 10 years. The longer you have to adjust, the more elastic you can be. So after that, we started talking about consumer opportunities versus consumer preferences, right? Remember that for something to be complete, that means that we have a relationship in between any two goods, right? So I have Excedrin and Tylenol. I either prefer Excedrin to Tylenol, I prefer Tylenol to Excedrin, or am I indifferent in between the two? But that means that a relationship exists for everything. That's the idea of completeness. Property 2 is just the idea that more is better. In economic models, we always assume that people want more rather than less. That's why our isoquant curves move outwards, right? Then there's the diminishing rate of substitution, or diminishing marginal rate of substitution. The more and more you have of one thing, the less you're really willing to give up something else to get more of it, right? But if you're just really wanting something and you have almost none of it, you'd probably be willing to give up more for the first one than if you would the fifth or sixth one. That's the idea of like, you're less likely to give up soda for the fifth slice of pizza. All right, then transitivity, that's the idea that if you prefer A to B and you prefer B to C, then you have to prefer A to C. It's just the idea that we have some sort of logical preference list, right? Then we got into the budget constraints. So one thing that I did notice, and we'll go over it when we're going over the questions, a couple people got confused about the idea of budget constraints versus preferences, right? Preferences is what level of happiness I am, the different bundles that can get me there. Budget constraints is this is what you can afford, right? We're looking at two goods. You have the price of a good plus the price of another good times the amount you get of both goods. That can only end up at a number, and that number cannot exceed what your budget is. Okay, so the slope of the line right here, this is related to like differences in prices. The amounts that we have on the end is like just the maximum amount that you could spend on that good. So if you had $100 and this was like, I don't know, video games, and video games are $20. If you have $100, you can spend $20 on video games. That means that at most you could have 5 video games. All right, so this would be a quantity of 5. And we know how much that is because we're looking at the budget relative to the price. And then same down here, right? So the amount of goods, these are in quantities, these are not in price. So I noticed a couple other people also looked and they said, oh, okay, that should be $20 and $10. No, it's the quantity of like how much you can afford when we're thinking about the budget constraint. How much can you afford of that good when you have this amount of money? All right, they can hinge outwards, they can hinge inwards, they can move outwards. So if you increase the amount of money in a budget, it shifts outwards parallel. If you change the price of one of the goods, one side may hinge in or out depending on if you can now afford more or less of that good. Okay, so then we had worked through some examples of the budget constraint. We'll talk a little bit about this when we're going over the homework, but then we get to the idea of consumer equilibriums. So we would like to know where the budget constraint meets indifference curves. Indifference curves are these nice little swoopy curves that move out in a parallel fashion, bleh, I can't talk today, outwards from the origin, right? So from 0, they move outwards and they're just parallel curves moving that show levels of indifference. Each one of these curves is a different amount of like happiness almost, or satisfaction. So you always want to be on the furthest out one. If we see here, we have curves 1, 2, and 3. Well, curve 1 is the first level of happiness. Curve 2 is a better level of happiness. Curve 3 is a better level of happiness. The curve represents all the different ways that you can get to that level of happiness, different bundles of goods. So the point in which the indifference curve meets the budget constraint, that's the consumer equilibrium. Wherever we get to the point where it's just touching, we have the one tangent. That is the highest level of happiness or satisfaction or indifference that we can get for that budget constraint. And that's really the place we want to be, right? So we talked a little bit about price changes, how how these might in turn move outwards. If we increase the budget, then it moves out parallel. If we change the price, we might hinge one or the other. This will just have different substitution and income effects. That part doesn't really matter. What you need to know is just the fact that we will get to a different indifference curve if we change one of the prices or income. Okay. So then let's go talk about here. Let's get a new one of these. Let's go through the most commonly missed questions on the assignment and the homework. So is this, oh, this is still assignment 1. Hold on, let me pull up one of the other assignments real fast. There we go, assignment 2. So with assignment 2, let's see what was going on here. So the first one, Ginny's weekly income increased from $500 to $650. As a result, she goes out to dinner 1 day a week instead of 1 day every other week. Is dinner a normal or inferior good? So remember, inferior goods are ones that you use less when you have more money. Normal goods are ones that you use more when you have more money. So here that's the idea that, yeah, this is totally a normal good. The next one was pretty easy. When the price of bananas rises by 2%, the quantity demand for peanut butter falls by 4%. That means that they'd be complements, something that people have together, because not only would they be purchasing or have less quantity demand for bananas because of the price increase, they have less quantity demand for peanut butter because of a shift in the demand curve. This shift in the demand curve is relative to the price of another good. Okay, so I like this one a lot. Let's talk about this one. Suppose bad weather decreases the wheat harvest by 12%, right? Okay, so that means that we're going to be having some sort of decrease in the quantity available of wheat. Now, that's not necessarily the quantity demand. People are still going to demand the same, right? But this would affect supply, not necessarily demand, but that's something to remember. Okay, so we've now decreased the amount of wheat. Well, what happens when we have a decrease in quantity? We know that there's going to be an increase in price. All right, so we know that there's an increase in price. If the price elasticity of demand for wheat is 0.6, how would the crop failure affect the price of wheat? So 0.6, we know that this one's in between 0 and 1. This must be an inelastic good. All right, so we had an increase in price. We know that people are relatively inelastic, which means they're going to buy a similar amount, right? So if price goes up, we're inelastic, then we know that total revenue must also go up because now people are going to pay more. So for the amount of wheat that's being sold, technically it helps the farmers because it's something that people were relatively inelastic to. So the price goes up, they'll still buy it in a similar quantity and you get more total revenue, good for farmers. So I think that one's kind of interesting. But always remember, you have to think about the price, if it's elastic or inelastic, and the total revenue. The relationship in between any two of those will give you what the third one is. Okay, how are the cross elasticity of income, or how cross elasticity of demand and income elasticity of demand similar? One looks at the changes in the quantity demand relative to a price change in another good, while income elasticity is looking at the change in quantity demand relative to an income change. Both are looking at the consumer purchasing power, the quantity demand for a good or service, but with respect to what is the difference? One is income, one is the price of a different good. Okay, local pizzeria charged $10 for a pizza. The owner of the pizzeria wants to increase the company's total revenue. Okay, so this one, same sort of thing. Remember, you should really go back and check out that video where we talk about this. But here, let's see. The owner of the pizzeria wants to increase total revenue. So he wants total revenue to go up. Okay, well, what else do we know? A recent market research shows that the elasticity of demand for his pizza is 1.5. So 1.5, this is greater than 1. We know it's elastic. Okay, well, should the pizzeria lower or raise the price? Well, we know elastic means that for the percentage change in price, if we decrease the price by a little bit, we will increase the quantity demand by a greater amount, right? So we would want to actually lower the price in this pizza case because people respond well to that, like a sale. You'll have more people come in and the total revenue goes up. So I would know about the differences in these situations. Let's see. The rest are mostly definitions, talking about what's attainable and unattainable. So attainable is on the inside of a budget constraint. Unattainable is on the outside of a budget constraint. The budget constraint line itself, this is efficient. We want to have efficiency. We want to use every bit of things that we have. Okay, draw a budget constraint for two goods, peanut butter and jelly. You have $60. Peanut butter is $5. All right, so we have peanut butter and jelly. So let's have P, B, and J. All right, so if you have $5 for peanut butter, you have $60. Let's see, how many can you afford then? 12? So you can have 12 peanut butters. Or jelly has a price of 6. We can have 10 jellies. Okay, so this is our initial budget constraint line, right? This is all the bundles of goods that $60 could buy. Okay, draw a shift on the same graph. What happens if the jelly price falls to $3? Well, if jelly falls to $3, we can now afford 20 jellies, right? This is that hinging outwards idea. Our peanut butter is still 12, but now our jelly is 20. We have now hinged outwards our budget constraint relative to this new price. All right, so the next one's just the idea of transitivity, and the other one's which one on the indifference curve would you want to choose? B, right? Because it gets you to the highest level of indifference. You get to I2 instead of I1. All right, now let's look at the quiz, or the most commonly missed problems in the quiz. Oh, we're getting through this. I promise we are. I know that this is exhausting. I appreciate that you're keeping in for all of this review. I know that tests are stressful, but you know what? I believe in you and you're going to do really good. All right, so the first one, definition. The second one, this was actually very similar to the peanut butter example. So a skateboard is a popular mode of transportation around campus for college students. Scooters are also a fun way to get around campus. If the price of skateboards go up by 2%, the number of scooters purchased goes up by 4%. Number is just the same as quantity, right? Are these complements or substitutes, and why? Well, these are going to be substitutes, right? Because that means if the price of one goes up, I buy more of the other one. Well, that's because if price goes up for one, I buy less of that good. I'm shifting to a new good, which affects the demand curve for the other good, but not moving the quantity demand. It's instead moving demand. It's moving the entire line for the scooters. Okay. This local bookstore one, this is very similar to something we've already done, but a local bookstore charges $24 for one of their mystery novels. The manager wants to increase bookstore revenue. Notice I seem to really love giving these types of problems. I would probably remember that if I was someone who was going to be taking a test in this class. All right, so let's think about it. So a local bookstore charges $24 for one of their mystery novels. The manager wants to increase the bookstore's total revenue. So out of the total revenue piece, oops, we know that he wants to increase total revenue. Okay. The market price of or the elasticity of demand is 0.7. So 0.7, this means that it's inelastic. What should they do with price? Well, we know if you want to increase total revenue for something that's inelastic, we're just going to go ahead and raise that price because we're not really going to lose as many customers, right? Okay, so then it's just explain two factors, explain the property of diminishing diminishing rate of substitution. I don't know why I can't talk today, but that's just essentially moving along that utility, right? So it's moving along the indifference curve for the diminishing rate of substitution, not the budget constraint. I think two people put the budget constraint. It's not, it's moving along that curve of indifference, right? Then DVDs and Blu-rays are both neat ways to watch movies. You have $300. That's the same thing where one side may hinge out. If we increase the total amount of money, like we do in part B, where we now have more money to be able to spend, then it moves things out in a parallel fashion. Woo, okay, all right, we made it through the second week review. I'll see you in the third week review.